Next, we're going to go over the gaze stabilization. This is an eye drill that will be fundamental towards building towards greater vision. This is also one of the first experiences you're going to get with training your vestibular system in addition to the visual system. Your vestibular system, you can just think of like your internal GPS, and we're going to stimulate it by having head movement as we go. As your head moves, we stimulate the vestibular system, and as your eyes follow the target, you stimulate the visual system. So this is a way to kind of calibrate your inner ear and your eyes all at once. This is important because now this will influence our balance in addition to our vision. And as our balance improves, overall our spine will behave better, and we are less likely to experience those protective outputs like pain, inflammation, loss of balance, blurry vision, and the list goes on.
Okay guys, now we have the gaze stabilization. Remember from our intro, this is kind of your introduction into the vestibular system. So now we are going to incorporate the inner ear by moving our head, all right? So now with this one, just like with our eye isometrics, you will need to reassess after each one because your head's going to be moving in different directions and you may find you get different responses, all right? Just a reminder, you always compare to your original baseline, not to the previous drill. Okay, so now the basic idea here is we're going to be holding a fixation. So we're going to be keeping our eyes focused on whatever target you decide. I'm going to use my pen again. You could use your thumbnail. You can use whatever you want. We're going to be holding a fixation while moving our head. So the key here is our eyes should never look away from the object that we are holding in front of us. Only the head will move. So you can think eyes still, head moves, okay? Now for this, I want you to break it up into 4 quadrants, so you're not thinking about moving across 2 different directions at a time. We're just gonna isolate a single direction and reassess after each one, okay? So let's dive right in. To begin with, I'm going to be holding the pen out in front of myself, okay? For all of these, the pen will be out in front of yourself. For this, I'm gonna keep my eyes on it and I'm gonna move my head to the left, okay? When I move my head to the left, my eyes will stay fixed on my pen, and I only want to turn my head so far that I can still see it with both eyes. So you're not going to turn all the way over here where you can only see it with one eye. You want to make sure you can still see it with the other one, okay? I'm going to do 3 reps, and I'm going to go at a nice controlled speed, okay? So I'm going to go from eyes facing forward, head in the middle, eyes are going to stay on it, and I turn my head to the left, keeping my eyes on it, and then I come back to the middle, okay? So I don't go head right. I'm going from left to middle. Eyes are on the target the whole time, left to middle, okay? So that was 3 gaze stabilizations to the left. Now I reassess, okay? Remember, if you got a bad response, we need to make it a little easier somehow. So it could be a bigger target. This one actually, range of motion is actually a very easy one too. So for some people, they find all the way over here is actually very challenging. You could go a little shorter, okay? It doesn't have to be quite as far. Now we're gonna go head to the right. So same idea. I'm going to keep my eyes fixed on my target and I move my head to the right. I can still see it with both eyes and I come back to the middle. Head right, head middle, eyes are on my target the whole time. Okay? And then I reassess again. Remember, compared to the original baseline. All right? Our last 2 directions are up and down. So I'm going to have it directly out in front of myself as well. Double check at this point that it is directly in front of you. A lot of times we end up holding it down here without realizing it. So it should be straight out in front of you. Okay, and I'm going to tilt my head back now. So head is going to move up, my eyes stay on my target. So head moves up, and then back to middle. Head moves up, back to middle. Head moves up, back to middle. Okay, go ahead and reassess again. We have our final direction, which is going to be head down. Okay, so double check that it's directly out in front of yourself. And now from here, I'm going to tilt my head down while keeping my eyes on my target, and then back to middle. Head down, back to middle, head down, back to middle, and then you're going to check again, okay? If you need to make any of these easier, remember you can adjust the size of your target, you can adjust the range of motion that you were using, okay? Or you could also go to a easier position. So if you're doing it standing, you could go to seated, okay? Just always assess and reassess. There are no wrong movements, just some movements will need to be adjusted for where you're at right now. Okay, just like all of our other drills and skills, gaze stabilizations need to be progressed, okay? So recall from our eye isometrics, there are many ways to progress them, and largely you will implement those same things. So I could go from, a pen cap to a pen tip, With this one, you can also use range of motion as the progression as well. So if before you noticed you couldn't turn your head all the way, you can only turn it, half the way and then come back. You could try, turning a little further. This one's speed actually becomes a progression as well. So you'll find that speed at the extreme ends of either velocity are actually harder. So if I said go really slow and take 10 seconds to turn your head, that actually becomes harder than going a little bit faster at a nice controlled speed. And likewise, especially for my athletes and things like that, we actually need to ramp up the speed because sport happens very quickly. But not just for athletes, it's important for us too, right? Think about being in a car. Things are moving fast. So speed is also a good one. So if before we were just moving at a nice controlled pace, we could also go a little faster as well. Remember, there's no wrong progression. You will just need to reassess yourself each time, okay? So let's run through a couple of these in real time now. Let's say I want to use a smaller target. If I go with a smaller target, then in that case, I don't have to change anything else. I can just keep a nice comfortable speed and go with a smaller target, okay? Instead of increasing time on this one like we did for our isometric, we could increase reps. So if I did 3 reps before, I don't necessarily have to make it smaller. Maybe I go for 5 reps, right? So I can go eyes left 5 times, all right? And lastly, we have speed, or not lastly, but another option would be speed. Remember, if you do speed, this is typically the one that will give you the most extreme response the quickest. So make sure that you double check after that it was okay for you. A lot of times it's very easy to get dizzy if you go too fast, which I'm sure, you can just imagine if you were just staring at something and like shaking your head violently, you can get dizzy very quickly. So if you choose speed, be sure to be careful when you reassess, right? Let's say if we do speed, that means I can keep the same size of my target and I can go a little faster to my left. Okay? It doesn't need to be breakneck speed, it should just be faster than it was before, okay? And then likewise, like I already demonstrated, you could actually go slower to make it harder as well, okay? Those of you feeling really good, you could try blending 2 of those together. There's no wrong answer, just make sure that you reassess each time. Your progression is unique to you. Okay, so for our near point gaze stabilization, it is still technically a gaze stabilization, which we have already gone through. So all the stuff that applied for our regular comfortable distance gaze stabilization is still 100% in effect. This one, however, becomes kind of its own unique skill because you need to be able to do all this stuff when it is close to you, right? It is generally harder when it is closer to you at this point, and this is obvious because a lot of people, if they bring something close to them, all of a sudden they need to put on their glasses. Or, if you've been in a restaurant and you see somebody with a menu and they're holding it out here to be able to see it, it's very, very common. So to be able to do this at a closer point is very important, and you need to sort of treat this as its own fresh baseline where you're now still comparing. So just because you were good with a gaze stabilization at a comfortable distance to the right, it's not guaranteed that you'll be good at it when it's directly in front of your face, okay? So to begin with, how close should it be? To begin, I usually just say go about 50% is close. So if I was at arm's length for my comfortable distance gaze stabilization, I would go, maybe halfway in, all right? That is gonna be another way to sort of progress it later, where, if halfway in was okay, I could actually go, 1 inch in front of my face to make it even harder, but I would just start about halfway in, right? We're gonna have our 4 different directions, and we'll just run through them real briefly. So I'm gonna bring it about halfway in, right? If you're feeling good with it, you can go even a little closer. And now we'll go head left. So let's do eyes on my target, head moves, and I'm gonna do 3 at a comfortable speed. Okay, and then I reassess, see how I feel. Now we can do eyes to the right, okay? So I bring it in nice and close again, and we'll go head to the right. Eyes staying on my target. Okay, reassess compared to the original baseline. We have head moving up, so I bring it close, head tilts back, eyes on my target. Okay, reassess to the original baseline, and then we have head moving down to finish. So nice and close, head down. Okay, so now you have 4 different directions of near point gaze stabilizations, and the near point will sort of be its own area of skills that you need to work on aside from it just being at a comfortable distance. Okay, now the progressions for the near point gaze stabilization are essentially the same progressions I would use for your comfortable distance gaze stabilization. So we'll just review them briefly, but if you're already comfortable progressing at the regular gaze stabilization, you can more or less now just implement that same change up here and just kind of reassess and see how it goes, right? So we had, going to a smaller point. So if I bring it closer, I have a smaller point, and let's say, I want to go to the right first, I've got a smaller point. Okay, we could also use speed, so I can keep my normal target, bring it close, and then go faster. Okay, we talked about range of motion, where if initially you actually had to make it easier by not turning your head as far, you could try going further at a closer one. And then with this one, because we're talking about near point, a big progression with this will just physically be bringing it closer to you. So if we started initially, I said bring it in about 50%, where if here was my normal gaze stabilization, here was my near point, I could just keep bringing it in even closer, okay? It is worth noting, if it gets in really close, there will become a point where it will automatically get blurry. So if I bring this all the way into my nose, okay, at that point where it's all the way touching you, it will physically have to be blurry because our eyes cannot refract light enough that close to create a clear image. However, I should still be able to see one of them. So you'll know at a certain point you're actually running into an area of that needs improving if your object splits into two. So if I get into here and I'm now staring at two pens, that's indicating where actually we do need to improve that near point work. However, if it comes all the way in and I see one of them but it's just blurry, then that's fine. I could actually still work with that that distance. That would be fine. So just something I wanted to note, where if you do see it split into two, that's actually sort of giving you an indication that, hey, this is an area we need to improve. However, don't worry if it gets blurry. It has to get blurry at a certain point. So go ahead and try any of those, and just remember, there's no wrong choice. Just reassess and figure out what's going to work for you for now. Okay, so opposed gaze stabilization is going to be one of the more challenging eye drills that you can do because we've got a lot of moving pieces now. The one piece of advice I can give you right from the beginning is you will move less than you think you need to. Most of the errors I find that people encounter as they do this come from moving too much as opposed to not moving enough. So in general, as you go into this, think very small movements, okay? So now what's gonna be happening here? We have two different things. We are now gonna be moving our head one way as our eyes follow a moving target in the opposite direction. Okay, so now this is sort of blending in a lot of the other eye drills that we've done, coming together in a more advanced drill. Okay, so now with this, I still like to start in the very middle with my gaze, but now what's going to be happening is I keep my eyes on a target. I'm going to be moving my head just like a normal gaze stabilization. However, at the same time, I'm actually going to move my target in the opposite direction that my head is moving. So it's almost like a gaze stabilization combined with a smooth pursuit. Now, the reason I say move less than you think you need to is because you will run out of room very quickly. Because remember, if my head is moving this way, it means my eyes will hit the side of my skull very quickly. And if I'm also moving a pen that way and they're trying to follow it, I run out of room very fast. So the idea here is you're trying to sync up and sort of have a nice rhythm to this movement, where as your head stops moving, your pen also stops moving, and then they come back together. Okay, so let's go ahead and try one. What we're going to do first is we're going to move our head to the left while our pen moves to the right. And when we do this, we're trying to sync up the movements so it starts and ends together. All right, so I start in the very middle, my eyes start on my pen, and now I'm going to move my pen right as my head moves left. Okay, so you can see the pen didn't move that very much from the center. It only moved a little bit. So I'm not moving very much, but I'm trying to sync up the pen movement with my head movement. I'm going to do two more. Okay, it's going to take a couple to kind of get the hang of it. On the first one, most likely you'll do this and your pen will just end up over here, like out of sight, and that's okay. It's going to take a couple to get the rhythm of it. All right, so go ahead and reassess yourself after that first one. Now we need to go the opposite direction. So now my pen is going to move to the left as my head moves to the right, and we're going to try to sync this up as well. So if I start in the middle, pen moves left, head moves right, pen moves left, head moves right, and we're trying to sync up so everything ends together. And you'll see my pen is not moving very much because I don't have that much room for my eyes to actually move that direction. Okay, now we reassess after that one. We also have up and down. So same idea, right? If our pen is going to move up, it means our head's going to move down while we keep our eyes on it. So we start with it in the very middle of our gaze again, and now as the pen moves up, head moves down, back to middle. Pen moves up, head moves down. Right? Very small movements, but very controlled and very timed. We want to try to sync this up as best we can, okay? We reassess again, and now we finish with pen moving down, head moving up. So start with it in the middle of your gaze again, and now as the pen moves up, the head moves down. I'm sorry, as our head moves up, the pen moves down, and back to middle. So now the pen's going down as the head moves up. Okay, we'll do a couple more. Just trying to time this movement, and it's very minimal pen movement. Okay, and we reassess. So as you're reassessing, the same rules would apply as far as trying to make these easier if we had to. You can go just a little bit slower, right? I've done this with people where we had to go extremely slow because it was just a lot of things going on at once, and that's cool, right? We could be here and we're just going very, very slowly, just kind of timing things up. Another way to sort of adjust it is you could actually break this into 2 steps in the beginning, knowing that you will eventually have to merge them together. Meaning what I could do is turn my head halfway, move my pen halfway, and then come back. And you can fragment it a little bit just to kind of get the hang of the 2 things happening at once. Okay, but it's important if you do that, you do need to know that it should become a nice rhythmic motion at some point. So you're basically doing that just to sort of give yourself the building blocks so you feel comfortable with what should be happening. But then at some point you will need to kind of smooth these out again so that way it all happens at once. So now for the progression for the opposed gaze stabilization, you have a couple different options just like most of our progressions. Remember, this was already a fairly difficult movement, so when it comes to progressing it, you may not need to progress too much. The first one I would probably play with is just speed. So generally we have to slow this one down a lot, right? Because as things are moving, it's kind of like you're having to sync up a lot of stuff and there's not that much room to play with. So generally the first progression I would try is just going a little bit faster, right? So if we're going pen to the right, head to the left, and this is my standard comfortable speed, we could speed this up a little bit. Okay. The other way you can play with it is to just increase the amount of reps, right? We started with the 3 to 5 range. You could try going to the 10 to 12 range. That would be fine as well. You could also actually increase the range of motion. So now with that one, remember we talked about this being a very small movement because we don't have that much room to work with, right? If I'm starting in the middle of my gaze, moving my pen this way, I run out of room very quickly. So I could actually start with it over here. So now I'm actually having to have more range of motion as we go. Okay, so you could actually increase the range of motion as well, and that would be appropriate. Like I said, I would probably start with the speed first and maybe the reps second, but if you're starting to feel really good with it, you can absolutely start to sort of have an increased range of motion where your head is moving opposite your eyes as you're going, and that's a great way to start to introduce a lot of variability to this movement. The connected gaze stabilization, you actually already know how to do. I'm now just basically going to combine 2 directions of your gaze stabilization that you should now be fairly comfortable with, okay? So before we were isolating a single side, right? With our normal gaze stabilization, we were saying we're gonna go head only to the left or head only to the right. Now with the connected gaze stabilization, we are now going to merge those 2 directions and see how we respond. So in a sense, it's a little bit of a progression, but it should be one that you already kind of know how to do because I've made you practice both halves of it. We're just gonna smooth it out into one drill, okay? So we have connected gaze stabilization left and right, and we have connected gaze stabilization up and down. Reassess how you do after each one, and then we can go from there. So just like with our normal gaze stabilization, we want eyes still, head moving, okay? So eyes still, head moving. We're gonna go left and right first. So I'm gonna hold my target out directly in front of me, and now I'm gonna go head left, all the way over to head right. So now we're gonna hit that full range of motion, and we're gonna do 3 of them. Okay, so my eyes stayed on the target the whole time, and my head moved left and right. Go ahead and reassess yourself, compare it to your baseline, right? See how you did. If you needed to adjust it, you have the same rules as always. We can go with the bigger target, we can go with less reps, less range of motion, don't turn the head as much. Any of those are fine, okay? Also the speed, right? We could go slower if we need to, so on and so forth. And now we're just gonna check up and down. So just like before, we've already done up, we've already done down. Now we're just gonna blend them together. So we have the pen out in front of ourselves, and we're gonna go head all the way up to head all the way down. So now we are blending both directions together with the eyes staying on the target the entire time. And then go ahead and reassess yourself. Adjust it if needed, but now you have your connected gaze stabilizations. Near point connected gaze stabilization is very similar to our regular connected gaze stabilization, but just remember now we're sort of working at our near point, right? So if the regular connected gaze was, if we were out here at a nice comfortable distance and we were merging left and right together and top and bottom together, now we're just going to do it at our near point. So how close? A little bit of that is progression based, but I always said, you could start with sort of halfway as far as you were before, but if you need to make it even more challenging on yourself, go ahead and bring it all the way close, right? And then from there, we're keeping our eyes on our target and we're just going to combine two directions at a time, right? So eyes on my target, I can go all the way to the left and then all the way to the right. So we're just connecting two different gaze stabilizations together. Okay, and then we also had up and down. So then from there we could go to eyes staying on my target, head moving up and down, and we're just combining two so it becomes a connected gaze stabilization. And with this one now we're just dealing with it up close, so it becomes our near point gaze stabilization.